Testified.
What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo Vince, also known as Ricky France, and a great episode for you today. Returning guest, Douglas Valentine, is with us today. He's a historian, author, researcher, just all-around interesting person, and I really enjoyed our conversation today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed as much as I enjoyed having it. And last time he was on was episode 190. You can go back in the archives, look it up. It was about a year ago. Just search Ripple Effect Podcast and his name, Douglas Valentine, and I'm sure you'll find it in any search engine. He called in using video, so if you go on our YouTube channel, RV Theory 6 is the YouTube channel, or you can just search for Ripple Effect Podcast. You can see Douglas and myself have our conversation. In the show description, I always have links to our guests' website, social media accounts, all that stuff, and I also have links to all my social media accounts and my Patreon page, which you can support the show if you financially can afford it. If you can't, please share the show. Any of the new Patreon supporters who just started supporting the show, I truly appreciate it. It doesn't go unnoticed. If everybody contributed $1, I could do this full time, and obviously that's the future goal. And at one point, I'd love to do this full time. If it was paying the bills, I could obviously quit my full-time job and put out more content more frequently and more consistently. So that's kind of the goal. But for the time being, people who are supporting financially, I truly appreciate it. It helps take some of the pressure from meeting the subscription costs and bandwidth costs and storage costs and all that stuff. And if I have to buy new equipment or whatever, which I did recently because my last episode for some reason had a bunch of hissing and a bunch of static. And if you've been listening to this show, every once in a while I'll get that. So I replaced a bunch of cords, rewired things, try to find a different way of setting up the studio. So hopefully this show sounds way better and future shows will sound way better. So hopefully you appreciate that. And of course, those Patreon supporters help with the cost of those cables and cords and all that stuff. So you're contributing to helping the show a lot, which I really appreciate it. But if you can't support the show financially, share the show, tweet the show, review the show, thumbs up, subscribe to our YouTube channel or any podcast app you listen to the show on. So all that stuff helps. I've also done some interviews recently. One interview I did was on a show called Nowhere to Go But Up, which was a really, really fun conversation with the host, Sean. So check out that show on my YouTube channel. I have a couple different playlists. I have one with documentaries, just interesting films and documentaries. Also, I have a playlist called Ricky's Interviews. And obviously, that's what's in there, interviews. So the most recent one is in there, and any future ones will also be in there. So if you want to check it out, you'll see interviews I've done with Sam Tripoli on the Tinfoil Hat podcast, Jason Burmis on his YouTube channel, stuff like that, and a couple other ones. So definitely check it out. One thing about doing this podcast and it growing is it always boggles my mind that people want to interview me and talk to me because I'm an expert in nothing. But people seem to enjoy having me on. So I think regardless what your resume is, and my resume, if I were to write it out, would have nothing on it because there's nothing special I've done besides this podcast. And if it's the only thing that I do that's special, then I'm okay with that. And if all I'm good at is sparking conversation and holding a conversation and sharing ideas and exploring ideas, then that's okay too. So hopefully you guys are doing that with me and you appreciate that. And these people who are doing podcasts, more and more listeners are contacting me in regards to questions about starting a podcast. I'm so glad to hear that listeners are taking my advice and many other people's advice. Like Joe Rogan is another one who keeps telling people, start a podcast. If you want to, go ahead and do it. Stop procrastinating. One day your show is going to grow and people are going to have you on and it's going to blow your mind. And I think a lot of these more famous people in alternative media or just more famous people in general, when people want to talk to them and find them fascinating, they also feel like, hey, I'm just an average person with some opinions and perspectives. And I think we all kind of feel like that. So, but anyways, let me cut this rant short. Enjoy the show. Check out upcoming shows. Oh, also, the Union of the Unwanted, those alternative media swap casts that we've been doing, they're back. July 20th at 7 p.m. We're doing another one. By the time you hear this, it might have already been recorded and live streamed, but we're trying to do one every other week. So make sure to connect with me on social media. So when the show's live, you'll get those links. And it's going to be random guests every other week when we do these shows, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. It's going to be live. We're going to have tons of different people from alternative media, just trying to gather people, have a cool little hangout where different perspectives, different researchers, different podcasters come together, and just hope that we can spark some interesting conversations. So gather some interesting people, hoping to create some interesting conversations. That's kind of the goal. And maybe even debate. Who knows? So definitely something to look forward to. Enjoy this show, guys. Thanks for the support. Shirts coming soon. If you've been following me, I've gotten some shirts done, or not done, but designed, and hopefully they'll be done soon. So keep a lookout for that, and it'll be another way of supporting the show. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace. Okay. Awesome. So it sounds, you can hear me, right? And I can hear you.
Yeah, just go slow. I mean, I only have like 25% of my hearing and the hearing aids and all that. So I have captioning on Skype now, but there's a little bit of time lag. You'll say something and then I got to wait 2 seconds to actually see it come up. So yeah. As long as you can handle that, then everything's okay.
Yeah, no, it sounds good. I can hear you, and I think we're good to go. Yeah. So, thank you so much. Well, it's good to see that you're alive and well, because for a little bit I was a little concerned about your health. I didn't know how
you were. Slow down a bit. Don't talk so fast. Okay.
You know what's funny? Many listeners of this show are going to be glad that you said that to me. Because I do have a habit of speaking a little quickly.
Okay. Do you have... it's a virus among radio talk show people. They all talk fast. They try to squeeze as much as possible into the time that they have. So it's hard. I mean, I realize it's against your nature, but you got to try. Okay.
Yeah, well, this will be good practice for me.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, well, I'm glad to see that you're doing better and you're doing well, and your health is doing good. Could you give us a update on your health? How are you feeling?
Well, I'm up and down. I had that. I don't want to go through the list of my medical problems, but I got a list. And I'm okay for a while, and then something pops up. I'm 70 now, and I lived to kind of burn the candle at both ends. So everything's coming back to bite me in the ass. So if I get a couple of good gays in a row, I'm happy. I get dizzy and nauseous because of my hearing loss. And that plagues me, and I have arthritis in my hands, and so it's just on and on and on. Don't get old. Live fast, die young, and leave a good-looking corpse. That's the way to go.
It's pretty good advice.
Yeah, you're really going to read anybody who's old that tells you it's a thrill? It ain't.
Well, is there an aspect of possibly the wiseness that comes with like the life experiences that's nice? Because that's one thing I've kind of found. Like I had kids a little later in life. I'm not that late, but later compared to my parents who had kids at late teens, early 20s, whenever it was.
Yeah.
I had kids at 30, my first child, and I told myself, I'm like, I like the 30-year-old me more than I like the 20-year-old me. So there was something nice about waiting, because as a person, as a parent, I'm probably just a little wiser, a little better suited to handle the responsibilities of such an important job. And so I kind of like that aspect of getting older, you know, just the wisdom that comes with it, and the more years of self-reflecting and figuring out who I am as a person and what's important in life. Do you think at least that's the good thing of getting old, or one of the good things?
Yeah, sure. I absolutely agree with you about that. I mean, I know a lot of people that got married young and had kids young. Some of them it worked out with, some of it didn't. You know, I know people that got married older, you know, for the second, third, fourth time. You know, a lot, you know, and so a lot of people age well. Some people don't age well, you know, and the older you get, the more you see it, and that there are no, you know, wisdom is kind of a subjective thing, you know. I mean, it's a very, very subjective thing. I think that in your case, you were smart to wait. I think, you know, I mean, my advice would be for everybody to wait till they're 30. Plato said that you should not have, you know, you can't really think for yourself until you're 30. You know, that you don't even really know who you are, and you can't be trusted to do anything, you know. I mean, and that was back when 30 was like 50, you know, back in ancient Greece, you know, where it wasn't 30 now, you know, it was 40, 45, you know, getting to the end of your life, that, you know, there's definitely, it definitely pays in some ways, okay? But, you know, the proof is always in the pudding, to use a cliche, you know. I mean, look around you and see how many 30-year-old people are still stumbling around, you know. It's amazing, you know. So it works for some, doesn't work for other. Generally, I think it's true. You know, to spew another platitude, you know, Mark Twain said that youth is wasted on the young. You know, you get to be older, and wiser perhaps, but you're not young anymore, you know. And you have to rely on your brain and your philosophical mind. There's a kind of a joy, you know. Wordsworth said, though the radiance which was once so bright be now forever taken from our sight, we will grieve not, rather find strength in what remains behind. You know, when you're a young person, you have tremendous bursts of creativity. Guys like John Keats, Einstein. I mean, this is when they had their true creative bursts, when they were around 20, 21. You know, I mean, there's this radiance, you know, you're still in touch with the cosmic forces that sent us here. And you're in touch with them, and you haven't become completely socialized, you know, and commodified. You know, you're still, you know, to a large degree anti-authoritarian, and you're willing to take off in different directions and make discoveries that you would not have the time and the inclination to make when you get to be 30. So there's a lot of things to say for being young. You know, I mean, I feel like I wrote my best poetry when I was 21, 22, 23, 24. You know, I mean, I saw things in this more inspirational way. I felt that I was more closely in touch with, you know, cosmic forces and things, you know. And then the older you get, then you start relying on what's, you know, people refer to as a rational mind. So I don't know.
Well,
are we on the air now at this point?
Yeah, I'm recording. But this is all.
So if you're recording, it depends on everything depends on who you are and where you are and what time you're on, you know, you're living in, and your circumstances, whether any of this stuff is applicable. Okay, and I know people, lots of people, who knew everything they were ever going to know by the time they were 5, 6, 7, 13, 14 years old. They grew up like, let's say, if you find this relevant, you know, I'll talk for another minute or two about it. They grew up as a Jew or a Muslim or a Christian or a Catholic or as a Protestant. And that's what they believe. That's how they believe the world is ordered. And they look at the world that way. They're taught that communism is bad. And boom, for the rest of their life, they don't like communists. They're taught that blacks are inferior. Boom, for the rest of their life. They never question their beliefs. And I know zillions of people. I mean, so many people, I can't begin to tell you, who, when I was in high school with them, knew everything that they ever knew were going to ever know about the world. They, you know, I mean, in terms of their major assumptions about life and how society and culture are organized and what's important. You know, their father, if they were guys, put a gun in their hand when they were 10 years old. You know, and it's a family tradition. Now you got to hunt. If you want to be a man, you got to carry a gun. You got to join the military. You got to fight for your country. Baba boom, baba bang. That's how they think for the rest of their life. And if you start making sacrifices for the things that you believe in at the time you're 19, 20, 21, for example, you go off to Vietnam or Iraq or Afghanistan in the military and you fight terrorism or communism, and you go off and you form friendships with other guys your age, and some of them die. Well, then you're locked into those beliefs for the rest of your life because you have to honor the memory of those guys. And it takes a lot of unraveling, like particularly for veterans who've been in combat or who have sacrificed and have seen people sacrifice, for them to change their worldview. It's a lot easier to lock into what you've committed to and made sacrifices for, which is what we see in the southern red states right now. You know, why people cling to these Confederate statues. All right, this is the way they were brought up. They were told these people are heroes, they're righteous, and they believe that. And so now they patrol the parks of Charlottesville, Virginia, armed to the teeth, and to protect the Confederate monuments. You know, I mean, they're completely blind to any progress that the country's made in the last 175 years. They refuse to see, even if they're 25, 30, 35, 40, although you do see a predominance of younger people, but you also see older people, Vietnam veterans and stuff, who cling to these really totally irrational positions. And they've had these positions all their lives. So that's when I say to you, it depends on where a person is and who an individual is. It depends on who they are, not their age, you know, but what their major assumptions are and how they came to those assumptions. And the older you get, the more you see that people's actions, including like what you're seeing with the Second Amendment advocates supporting Trump and patrolling and showing off their macho machismo, you know, and the false bravado, you know, these are assumptions and it's emotional. It's not rational. So they say, no, it's not emotional. It's not irrational. You know, this is truth. So are they wise? No, you know, and you could easily say that 50% of the country falls into that category. So you have a country of people who are led by other people who believe the same things, that carry the same assumptions that they've been brought up with. You know, and they call them beliefs. But what the hell's a belief? You know, what does it mean to believe in anything? So for me, personally, you know, from a very young age, I made a decision not to belong to any group, not to identify with any religion, organized religion, any political movement, you know, to just try to free myself from anything that might require a basic assumption or commitment in terms of your beliefs, whatever beliefs are. And so, you know, I value that decision as having given me an open mind in order to be actually to pursue a rational analysis of things, of events. Okay, if you have a Christian perspective, you cannot, unfortunately, rationally interpret events. If you're wed to a dogma, if you're a communist and you see everything through communist dogma, no matter how much you try to convince yourself otherwise, you're locked in and you're not seeing things from one particular, you know, from a broad, eclectic position, which is really what we need people to do. But that requires people to make an even the bigger sacrifice of giving up their assumptions about themselves and who and what they are. And that's the hardest thing in the world for anybody to do, especially as you get older. Okay? So the idea of being wise when you get older also means it's a paradox, a conundrum. The older you get, the more you're locked into your assumptions and the less you're going to see things clearly. So, you know, from the sort of cultural, political, psychological, sociological point of view, it's a mixed bag. If you remain open-minded enough at the age of 60 to say, I was wrong, you know, about my beliefs, then yeah, sure, age has brought you wisdom. But wisdom means that, you know, as far as I'm concerned, that you got to change. It doesn't have anything to do with bringing your kids up properly. You know, that's sort of again, an ambiguous, subjective statement. What does it mean to bring your kids up right? You know, to make them Christians, to make them Jews, to make them Catholics, Protestants, you know, to imbue them with your beliefs? Or is your responsibility as a parent to raise kids so they have an open, eclectic mind? All right, you know, so it all gets very, very confusing. And like I said, it's I have had a abnormal, you know, I don't know, maybe not abnormal, but yeah, probably is abnormal, but I did not follow the normal course of career advancement or personal advancement. At the age of 31, and had gone back to college. I'd been a tree surgeon for 10 years, 12 years. My father called me up. He had just had his second open heart surgery. I think I told you about this. And he said, the doctor said if he wanted to survive, he had to tell the truth about what happened to him in World War II. Okay? And up until that point, my father had been pretty much a conservative guy. I remember him touting the John Birch Society, you know, and he considered blacks to be inferior. That sort of started to change when my sister married a black man. Then he sort of started to think it wasn't true. It was like, sort of forced upon him. But he had all these conventional views of things. And when he opened up to me and told me what really happened to him in World War II, he was able to change the basic assumptions of his life as an adult man at the age of 55. Now, that's a very, very rare thing. He's the only adult man that I've ever seen that did it. So wisdom did not come to him until he went through a couple of heart attacks, open heart surgeries, was on death's doorstep, had alienated everybody around him, had visited my family with his post-traumatic stress syndrome and turned us into a dysfunctional family, you know, the way lots of veterans do. You know, I mean, they come home and they visit their trauma on their family, and that affects their children, whether they try to be good parents or bad parents. Who you are as a parent, what you are, and your experience affect your children beyond your control to some extent. And anyway, he went about after that, after he broke his silence and revealed the secrets of his soul. That sort of paved the way for him to be able to reinvent himself. Okay, so it's a rare thing to see. You know, it's very, 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 very strange, mystical, magical thing to see. A person sort of regains the radiance of their childhood when they go through this kind of a cathartic change about who they are later in life, but it rarely happens. So, you know, that's, you know, talking from you know, my experience and what I've seen, that's
Yeah.
how I view the situation. You know, like, just to give one more example, you know, I mean, people they're locked into Republican or Democrat, you know, and they spend their life in the Democratic Party, or they spend their life in the Republican Party. And if they want to get up the ladder, if they want to make their lives as a politician and move up the ladder in the organizations, they have to adhere more and more closely to the doctrine of the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, which means they're never going to change. You know, so they're always going to implement that philosophy, and they're not open to change. And you can say the same thing about it. People who go to work for a corporation. All right, you go to work for a corporation and you start out as you know, down on the bottom, and you want to get a promotion. Well, how do you get a promotion? You have to, you know, you have to show that you can parrot the corporate line. That yes, Pepsi's better than Coke. Ford is better than Honda. You know, and these things start becoming ingrained in you. You pitch that corporate line. You follow the corporate rules and regulations. And maybe after 20 or 30 years, you have a nice big house, and you have a second house in Florida, and you have a bunch of cars, and you have 5 acres of land, and you have all the everything that consumer society says is valuable and is a symbol of success. And who are you as an individual? Well, all you are is a product of this corporate machine. And if you raise your children in that mold, then you're just producing another little consumer who obeys and consumes and follows the corporate line and believes all the, you know, whatever the dogma is. So it's so very, very difficult to gauge what is wisdom in this society that we live in, which is, you know, overwhelmed by this, by competition with another brand, whatever the brand is, by the need to consume and to show that your success by the amount that you consume and how you consume, you know, and without any real regard to the climate or things like that. You know, I mean, we all have 2 cars. You know, you have your own car. You know, I mean, you can't get around unless you have 2 cars. Is this really a healthy way to live? You know, one of the things that COVID showed was that, you know, that pollution levels went down when people start driving so many cars. So all of us have this sort of sinister influence in our lives, whether we're conscious of it or not, because what we're told is a symbol of success, and what we're told is success are actually antithetical to our humanity. Okay, and so the more that we participate in this, what, you know, Guy Debord called the society of the spectacle, and the more that we surrender to it, and we surrender our individuality and our youthfulness to, you know, to be open to change and creativity and to be anti-authoritarian, the less that we lose actually our humanity as individuals. But when everything in this society is reassuring you that you're doing the right thing, because everybody else is the same way in society. So they're all saying, yeah, beautiful yacht you have, man. I went down to Punta Gorda and, I got to walk around on your yacht at the yacht club, and, wow, man, you did great, and your kids are going to inherit a lot of money and they're going to have property and they, you did great. You're a success. But is it, that's how we measure success in this society of the spectacle. And really, is it success? Or is there some internal world, internal life that we're sacrificing that might connect us to other people in a very humane way? And there's no doubt that that's the situation we're all in.
I completely agree with you. I couldn't agree with you more. There's a author I really like called Christopher Ryans, Dr. Christopher Ryans. He wrote the book Sex at Dawn. You might be familiar with that book, but he also wrote a book called Civilized to Death. And it's all about what you're talking about. And I had him on some years ago. I was always a huge fan of his for that exact reason, because he touched on this topic of what is success and what is, we call civilization and progression. And we think because we have phones that go faster, cars that go faster, more material wealth, that we're progressing. But addiction is up, anxiety is up, depression is up. So it's like, what's really progressing? We might not be progressing as people. We might be just progressing as material things like technology and stuff like that. And, as a Portuguese immigrant, and I have parents who are Portuguese immigrants. I was just talking to my mother about this today, about how her and a lot of these immigrants come to America. They get sold this idea that here is it's the land of opportunity to get more stuff. You can get more, more stuff. You come to America and you can have more stuff. But the problem is, like you mentioned, there's a price to pay for all that. And the price is maybe pursuing a hobby. Maybe it's for more free time with your family, more free time with your friends. In general, just more time of doing things you enjoy, and that is going to be sacrificed for you doing more things you have to do to buy those material things. And satisfaction is the death of desire. You buy that material thing, you're satisfied. Now you need a new thing. Now you need the newest thing. And it's an endless cycle. And I think when you're young, and so one of the critiques of the younger people today, and I'm pretty young myself, but younger than me, is that they don't appreciate money. And a lot of people see that as a flaw. And I see that as not necessarily a flaw, because what I think happened was when you were growing up, when I was growing up, everything that brought enjoyment in our lives, or at least many things that brought us enjoyment in our lives, we needed money to get it, right? So if we wanted a new album, if we wanted to go to the movies, if we wanted a lot of these things that brought us happiness, to go to any type of a book, a lecture, whatever it may be, it in many cases it required money. But today, kids have access to all that. They have access to their friends. They don't need a car. They can just talk to them over Skype. They can talk to them over social media. They can get all the movies, music, lectures, whatever it may be, for free, as long as you have Wi-Fi, which most people have. And I think because of that, they're like, wait, we don't really care to work as much, because the things I enjoy don't really require money. And I can enjoy a lot of free stuff. And but I also think it's kind of redirected the way they look at the world. Like you said, and like I was discussing with my mother, everybody got consumed with like, we need money, and it became such a focus. And to talk about trauma, this is something I actually just talked about this weekend on a interview. Somebody was interviewing me for their podcast, and I was talking about how one of the reasons why I'm so bad with money, and one of the reasons why I try to spend as little time as possible thinking about it, is because of growing up in a poor family. It was the topic. It was always the thing we talked about. It consumed our lives. It's the stress of not having it. How can we save it? It's about thinking about and then when you do have it, now it consumes your life, because how do you save for the future? You know, how do you make sure you don't waste it? And there was this, I think he was an Irish soccer player, who had this quote that I love. He said, "I spend all my money on girls, alcohol, and cars. The rest of it I wasted." And it was one of those things where it's like, oh, somebody might look at him and say he's wasting his life away, spending all his money recklessly. And he looks at it as, I'm enjoying life, I'm experiencing life, and everybody else is living incorrectly. So it's perspective. But I think corporations, capitalism, a lot of these things all intertwine and contribute to our problem with thinking that money is not the root of all evil, because we say that, but many of us get caught up with pursuing it, and it becomes an addiction, just like any other addiction. You can never have enough of it. Your whole life is all about it. You will lie, cheat, do something that is morally wrong to consume it. But yet, when you have that addiction to money, we don't look down to you. We look up to you. We look at you like, oh, look how successful you are because of this financial wealth. But you might be financially wealthy, but poor in many other aspects. Poor as your ability to reflect, poor in your ability to connect with people, leave a legacy that's worth, or maybe a legacy that you could be proud of. And maybe some people are proud of just consuming money. But I forget where I heard this story of a very wealthy man who passed away, and the only person who showed up to his funeral was his driver. And I don't know if that story's true or not, but I'm sure situations like that happen, and where you really cut all ties with people, you burn bridges, and you do everything you can to consume more material things. And unfortunately, in America and probably many places, those are the people who, in our system, are the most successful financially. And it's really hard to get ahead if you aren't cutthroat and willing to do those things that are morally wrong. So I'm sure you want to add to that. I hope I didn't talk too fast.
No, there's nothing to add. I mean, we live in this country now, and if you watch TV, you're besieged with advertisements. If you turn on the TV and you follow politics, you're besieged with disinformation and misinformation. If you try to get information nowadays, you can't be sure where it's coming from, and you don't know whether there's so much of it, you don't even know anymore whether you're being told the truth or whether you're being lied to. And there's so much to know that it's hard to get a foothold and to start educating yourself about what's really going on, and so I think that this spectacle that we live in, a part of it is a great escape from this, if you surrender to it, to the way that the corporate advertisers want you to live, and you just give up and you become part of it. You can find a certain satisfaction too in that. A lot of people do. They're really, really happy in these sort of superficial material lives.
But do you think they eventually reflect and say, maybe all that time I spend working, pursuing financial wealth? Do you think they ever, like in many cases, because I mean, this is just a assumption, but I think many people would probably look back at their lives, because I know quite a few people who look back at their lives and are like, you know what, I wish I didn't consume, or I didn't spend so much time at work. I wish I was there when my kids were growing up. I know people who never had kids because they were so consumed with building a business or chasing a career. So do you think in some cases people, even if you can convince yourself, yes, I'm happy with this lifestyle, do you think in many cases people at some point reflect and think like, maybe I wasn't happy?
Well, you know, I'm in a different generation from you. You're concerned with childcare, you know, and bringing up your kids. My contemporaries are finding joy in their grandkids, you know, and a lot of them had maybe had struggled terribly throughout their lives. Okay, maybe their children had problems, maybe they had problems, maybe they were successful, maybe they weren't. But now that they're retiring, they find joy in their grandkids. And no matter whether they lived as part of the spectacle in the corporate world, they're retired and they find joy in just playing with their grandkids. Your parents may really enjoy your kids, you know, and a lot of the grandparents say, being a grandparent's better than being a parent, you know, because you get to hang out with the kids, but you don't really have any of the responsibility. So in a way, you know, your life is circling around. You can't actually be a kid anymore because you're 65 or 70 or 75. But if you hang out with your grandkids, then you get to re-experience your own childhood again through them. And you get to feel all those feelings and stare at how radiant these little kids are, and maybe when you're a parent, you're concerned about disciplining them and making sure they don't go running off and stuff like that. And when you're a grandparent, you think, that's cool, man, he's just being a kid, you know, and so there's a whole different perspective for that. So I know a lot of people who, at my age, even if they made a mess of their lives and they have grandkids, they're happy to have grandkids. And they find a whole new, renewed spiritual revival in that. So, you know, it's always a mixed bag. You know, there's never any rule or regulation other than the fact that you know, eventually you die. You know, I mean, that's, you know, and the older you get, the more you realize that that's looming. You know, and so there's this urgency to try and, when you get older, to try and recapture some of that magic from when you were young. And for a lot of people, you know, it's grandkids magically appear at that time, and it saves them, you know, and it's a kind of a salvation. And so that's enough. That can be enough for people. It's just having grandkids. You don't need anything more in your life. You know, and if you have a certain amount of money and you're not starving, you know, that fulfills it up. And so the whole idea of kids and grandkids can be be fulfillment in a person's life. And then there's people like me who wanted to do something more. You know, to do something that would have affect society. Affect the way, actually try to affect the culture, or lead it, you know, write books so that people could read them and maybe see more clearly the direction that things are going in, and to make corrections and things like that. And I'm one of those people that in astrology they call the puer aeternus, Peter Pan, the kid who never grew up. You know, so I never wanted to lose touch with that in myself. You know, the radiance that was in me, that youthful radiance. You know, and I fight to maintain it in myself, so I don't have to live it vicariously. through grandkids or kids or something like that, so that I can feel it in myself. And this is true for lots of creative people. They're less concerned with family life than they are with creativity, with the the creative processes and maintaining the creative processes within themselves. So there's all sorts of different kinds of people out there. And, if you want to make a social contribution, it's more difficult if you don't have a lot of money to find the time to be able to do these things, or unless you get into politics. Again, like somebody like AOC wanted to affect society, and so they get into politics at a young life. And their ideas, they're less concerned with family perhaps than making social change. There was a writer, a German writer, Hermann Hesse, who wrote a book, Sid Arthur. I don't know if you ever heard about it. It was very popular back in the 60s. And, it's about a guy who becomes a Brahmin. He becomes, like a Buddha. And he goes through, he grows up in a wealthy family, and he is going to become a prince. And he throws it all away and he becomes a monk. And he travels around in poverty, and he tries to understand things, And one day he's sitting by the riverside, and he contemplating the river, and it dawns on him, the river is doing more than he is, And he decides then to become part of the world and to try and help people and do things. So there's a sort of and it's the archetypal journey of many creative people who want to make a difference socially. Do you become a monk and just find inner peace, or do you risk rejection, trials and tribulations, to actually get out in the world and to try and make an impact on the world, like you're doing with your radio show? You have this urge to try and make an impact. It's beyond your family. It's from within you. And the radio show gives you a way to maintain, connection with yourself and who you are, because it's something that you're doing out in the world. And so, the things that you do on your radio show affect your listeners, but also the people and the guests that you have on your show affect you. So you're still changing. And you want to go through changes, and you want to evolve, so as long as you're doing something creative like this, you become part of you continue to change and to grow. It's when people get into dogmatic ruts that they lose touch with that part of themselves. Okay. And so people like me or you, we come along and we try to remind them that there is this part of them that can grow and evolve and change and reassess and reevaluate and make corrections, and to do that by trying to speak honestly to them about things that we know. Okay, so there's just a million ways of going about things, and it all has to do with our own individual psychology and socialization, the way that the path that we choose. Mine was sort of unique, and it led me down a different path, a path to the point where I infiltrated the CIA, in the mid to late 1980s. That's a very unusual path. Not too many people have done it. I don't know anybody else who did, quite frankly. So that gave me a unique perspective, and that becomes my identity. I sort of cling to that in a way, but at the same time, I keep trying to write new books and to evolve beyond that, and to learn new things and to see the world and my life and how I fit in it more clearly. To the extent that my failing powers enable me to do that. Getting back to the idea of wisdom, wisdom sort of suggests a kind of stasis. My advice is to keep becoming.
Yeah, it's
not to be satisfied that you have wisdom or that you know anything, and to keep reevaluating and not get to that point. So, like people in the arts tend to want to keep creating, and I think that's the world that I wanted to get into, the creative world. And we have a responsibility to people that haven't chosen that path.
Yeah, I played music growing up, but one of the things I used to love was writing, being the lyricist. I played guitar and I sang, and I wrote, basically it was poems that I ended up changing into songs, because there really isn't much difference besides making words rhyme and creating a chorus and some catchy melodies. But I love the power of poems and words, and I felt like in the process, and you hear comedians talk about this too, in the process of writing, but musicians also, how you almost feel like you're reflecting or you're gathering and organizing your thoughts and feelings during that process of writing. And it was always a aspect of writing I loved. I remember telling myself when I got into writing lyrics or poems, it was to try to be as honest as possible, to pretend nobody is ever going to see this, and try to tap into some true emotions and honesty. And when I did that, I found myself having a better understanding of why I felt certain ways, what bothered me, and all that stuff. So I always had this extreme appreciation for arts and creativity. For example, there's this, I believe it was a study or some where they asked kids at some age, very young age in school, like, how many of you think you're creative? And everybody would raise their hands. And then as they got older, every grade that they would ask, less and less kids would raise their hands. And the reason I believe that is because school has nothing to do with being creative. It has to do with memorizing stuff and just going with the herd. And when I was playing music, people would ask me, like, how do you write a song? I could never do that. And I would tell them, I think everybody has that ability, and they're born with that ability. When you play, you're using your creativity, you're using imagination. But as you get older, people tell you that stuff is a waste of time. Focus on school, where you're memorizing stuff. Focus on how you're going to make money, all these things. So I think little by little, people maybe lose that ability. And people like yourself and myself, we continue it, and we continue doing it. And to me, it's such an important aspect of my life. Just, I need something creative to do. If it's music, if it's art, if it's having a conversation and trying to figure out who I want to talk to and what do I want to talk about. Like, this is all different aspects of my journey and growth. And I've said this metaphor before on the podcast, but I think life is a huge puzzle. And every time I figure something out about the world or myself, it's one more piece of that puzzle. And my goal is to gather as many pieces as I can before the finish line, so I can, even if I don't know exactly what the image is, I have a better understanding of what it might be. And to me, that's super important. And I think too many people just live their lives, ignorance is bliss. Let me just live my life and not stress about certain things that are going on in the world, or not stress about anything. And like you said, just gather material wealth. It brings me some type of satisfaction and happiness, and not have these deeper conversations. And this is where, because I'm very much like you, I don't want to join any club, any team. I don't want to be a part of any group, because I think it's going to restrict my thinking and my ability to maybe acknowledge when some other group might make a valid point or have a interesting way of looking at things. And too often I think people just we're tribal. We join teams and we defend those teams. But in regards to religion, I was raised a Catholic, and then I fought against it. You know, I was very anti-religion because I didn't like the idea of like they didn't like me questioning things. I felt like it was very closed-minded. But what happened was I left that team to join another team called atheism. And I'm like, oh, this is also a team. And they also have closed-minded thinking in some regards. And then as I got older, I started appreciating what religion brought to some people. And that's for some people, it helps them get out of that cycle of just going to work and being materialistic. And they go to church or some spiritual place and they ask these bigger questions, and they ask like, what is life about? What's more important than money, and maybe who you are as a person, how you treat people, and all these things. So I started finding value in it didn't make me religious, but I started looking at religious people as like, okay, I see a value in that, and I see a value in this. And that's kind of the way I started looking at everything. It's like, okay, well, is there some value in this? And even if I disagree with it, is there some value in it? And I think too often people don't ask those bigger questions. And I can tell that you're obviously a fan of philosophy. And I just had Jay Dyer on not too long ago, and Jay Dyer loves philosophy. We kind of got into it, and I love having these type of discussions because I hope not just for myself, because like you said, during these interviews, it's not just for the listeners. I gain a lot out of these, and I grow, and it's a journey for myself, because even when I'm sharing my opinions with you or my perspectives, it's forcing me to gather them and organize them and to know if like they even make sense after I say them out loud, and kind of reflect on them. So yeah, I think these type of discussions are so important.
I agree. You know, my father, his best friend in the world was the Methodist minister, you know, and I was not, interested in becoming part of the church, even though I was raised a Methodist, but I feel comfortable in church. I always liked midnight mass at the Catholic Church. I mean, if you're not something, it doesn't mean that you can't like it, or find things that are beneficial in it. I mean, I would never, the whole idea of a patriarchal organization like the Catholic Church, or even the Protestants, where you have a man at the top and all the priests are men, and the women are kind of subservient and stuff like that. That I would never agree with in a million years. That I do not like. I'm more of an egalitarian. And if the Catholic Church started having women priests, and didn't have all this dogma, I'd find it a lot more attractive than it is. But at the same time, if I'm wandering around somewhere and I feel the need to reflect and some solitude, and to just feel the beauty of what a religion is, I don't mind popping into a church, sitting in a pew, just feeling the spirit of things. It has that. There is that aspect to it, but those are things that you pick and choose about these things. You can find the goodness in these things, and what's beneficial in these things, and I knew it was beneficial for my father, so fine. I wasn't about to try to take that away from him or convince him that it's not something he should be doing. I mean, I have friends that are devout Catholics, and they pray for me. And I find that very heartwarming. I think it's a beautiful thing. That they go to church, or they sit, or wherever, and they actually care for me, and they say a prayer for me, and I feel it. when they do it. I can actually feel it, that they care for me, and they're communicating with some greater spirit, to try and express their love for me. So there's good things in all this stuff, and then at the same time there's patriarchy, that they, and the rigidness of all that stuff, which, I despise, but I've always been able to navigate it and see what's good and pick those little pieces out, and it's not a little piece at all, I mean, the spiritualism is huge. It's huge. It's, the center of it, but it gets muddied by the doctrine and the closed-mindedness and the following the same rules for 2,000 years and stuff like that. So anyway, I have no problem with spirituality at all. In fact, anything that connects people spiritually to is something that connects them to other people. If you feel like saying a prayer for somebody else, you're connecting with them spiritually. That's really what it's all about. This whole idea of loving other people, wishing them well, trying to bring happiness and goodness into their life. And if you find a vehicle for doing that, well, wonderful. That's what you want to do. That's the sort of thing that you want to do for everybody across the board, and keep your mind open to the spirituality that infuses everything and is there. And unfortunately, it's the consumer society that makes a tree into an object rather than the embodiment of something sacred. Because if you start saying trees are sacred, then you're pagan, and yet, they are sacred, and they should be treated as sacred. And all these things, they're part of the natural world. You want to be able to connect for them. And so anything that enables people to make that spiritual connection to everything that's living and part of our environment and other people, that's the way to go, to find a way to do that, no matter what it is. But my advice would be to anybody that you can do this yourself, and you don't need an organized religion, and that it's all right there. That would be the last thing I would say in our interview, is that the spirit is everywhere. It's all the time. I had Jehovah's Witness, who I was very good friends with, and he would always come by, and everybody else slams the door on him, and I let this guy come in and we would talk. And one day, he holds his Bible in his hand and he said, the Word of God is in this book. Oh, I said, well, no, Rick, the Word of God is all around us. And if you keep staring at that book, you're going to miss the fact that it's right here in the room with us right now. Open your heart a little bit wider. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to think that God is in a book or in these prescriptions or anything like that. The whole idea is to open yourself up to recapture this divinity which we associate with children, and to be able to feel it and communicate it to other people, so that we can all enrich our lives and get ourselves out of all this competitive culture and the consumerism, and bring some sort of harmony and love, back to our culture in a unified way. And for me, it means divesting of yourself of all these different groups and finding that one common thing with everybody. And that ultimately is that we all share the same self. We all share the same soul. And all these other things just divide us and bring us further apart.
And I think that's probably a part of the plan, divide and conquer. You see it now more than ever.
Sure. And meanwhile, the head of the Democratic Party and the head of the Republican Party, they go to the same country club and play golf together. And they laugh at the rest of us, So don't get caught up in it, do the best you can. And just keep an open heart and an open mind.
Yeah, and something about your wisdom is that people who have been studying history and writing about history, you've seen this many times where it's divide and conquer, it's getting us to fight among ourselves, and like you said, it's pro wrestling, it's theater. You know, behind the scenes, Macho Man and Hulk Hogan are having dinner together.
Yeah.
You know, so it's important to understand that the only ideology many of these people care about is money and power, and it's consuming more of it. And a lot of times they'll sell you any idea that they're on the same boat with you, and they have the same type of thinking and moral compass. And at the end of the day, they don't care, you know, as long as they get your vote and they get the lobbyist money and they get the funding, they'll say whatever it takes. And that's why I just believe anybody who gets into politics is psychopathic, egotistic, have some type of psychological issues, because you have to be a great liar, a great actor. You have to be able, I mean, it's kind of the same features you would have to be a CEO of a big corporation, you know, just a very suspect moral compass. And I think there's been studies where, like, I don't know if it was politicians or presidents of corporations had like all the same traits of psychopaths or something like that. I remember reading that, but it's not hard to believe.
Yeah. So can we sign off now?
Yeah.
It's an hour, so.
Yeah, so sorry for holding you up, but thank you so much, Douglas. I really appreciate your time. I'm glad to see that you're doing good and you're doing well, and I always love extracting as much wisdom from you as possible. And it was a fun conversation. Hopefully, there is no Portuguese festival this year. I done like all festivals. There aren't any going on this year in Ludlow or anywhere. But hopefully, if you're up for it one day, I'd love to grab lunch or dinner sometime. I'll bring you to a nice Portuguese restaurant in town, and we'll have a drink and then talk a little bit.
I would love to do that. I'd really like to do that a lot.
Yeah. Well,
thank you for the invitation, and thank you for having me on your show. The next time I come on, I'll tell you about the Department of Homeland Security.
Great. Yeah. Hopefully that's in the near future.
Okay.
Great, Douglas. Hey, feel better and talk soon.
Okay, bye-bye.
Take care.